Hello everybody, welcome back to this commentary series where we will be discussing and analyzing part 2 of Attack of the Clones. In our last commentary video, we ended where Obi-Wan arrives on Kamino. As you can see, Kamino is full of water and stormy weather. The stilt structures you see here are what make up the capital of Kamino, called Tipoca City. The Kaminoans who occupied Tipoca worked either with the cloning program or with the bureaucracy. The designs of Tipoca City draw inspiration from numerous sources, including massive offshore oil derricks and the retro-curved science fiction cities of pulp magazines. The only minor nitpick I have for Kamino is that the water looks a little too smooth, but at the time this planet felt so real, but with advancing technology that we have today, you are able to point out the smoothness of it. However, there are still some shots of Kamino that hold up really well, but again, this is one of the things I'm going to keep pointing out, which is that Attack of the Clones is probably George Lucas's most ambitious and experimental Star Wars film. It is really remarkable how he and his team were able to pull it off on such a massive scale. This movie truly revolutionized digital filmmaking. Once Obi-Wan enters inside, we get to see what the Kaminoans look like. Tall, thin species with pale skin. They are influenced by the aliens from Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In this interaction, the alien doesn't introduce herself. Instead, she says that the Prime Minister was expecting Kenobi. Obi-Wan is startled by this, but kind of goes along with it so he can investigate. We get introduced to the Prime Minister of Kamino named Lama Su. They sit down and have a conversation. Lama Su tells him that they are on schedule. 200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way. Kenobi plays along and says, "That's good news." Lama Su then tells him, "Please tell your master Sifo Dyas that his order will be met on time." Obi-Wan tells the Prime Minister that Sifo Dyas was killed almost 10 years ago. Lama Su responds by saying how he is sorry to hear that and that he would have been proud of the army they built for him. Obi-Wan is surprised. "The army?" Lama Su responds, "Yes, a clone army. And I must say, one of the finest we've ever created." Obi-Wan asks if Sifo Dyas said who the army was for. Lama Su states, "Of course he did. This army is for the Republic, but you must be anxious to inspect the units yourself." Obi-Wan continues to play along and says, "That's why I'm here." We cut to the lake country on Naboo, where Padme pointed out how isolated it is, so she can keep avoiding the threat of any danger. She and Anakin walk together, and Padme tells him about how she and her friends would come to this place for a school retreat and swim to the island every day. Mentions how she loves the water. She then talks about how they would lie out on the sand and let the sun dry them. And now we're about to get into the most infamous line of the whole movie. I think it's better if I just play it for you.
"I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth."
Now, what is sand? It's coarse, rough, and freaking irritating. What he says makes sense. But believe it or not, there's a lot to unpack here in this scene, and it's very important. So, going back, we see Padme mention how she loves the water. This represents her life growing up on Naboo. It's a very pleasant place she grew up in. Anakin mentions how he doesn't like sand. Now, the sand he is talking about is the sand on Tatooine, which is where he grew up. This place was not so pleasant for him as he was a slave, and later on we'll see why he doesn't like sand even more. So what's really going on here is that Padme is saying she had a nice childhood, but Anakin is saying he didn't really have one, and life on Tatooine was pretty rough. But hold on. He then states how the sand on Naboo is soft and smooth, which he is really thinking about the dichotomy of Naboo and Tatooine, and that Naboo is so much nicer, and that's really because of Padme. Naboo ultimately represents Padme for Anakin. He goes on to touch her back, and the romantic tension doesn't really begin until they look at each other. He slowly goes in, and she's not stopping him, and they kiss. The fact that she doesn't stop him gives him the green light to kiss her, but then she does stop kissing him, and they're left with an awkward moment. The romance is, in a way, designed to be awkward because they are in an awkward situation. Both can't really express open feelings for one another. Anakin, being a Jedi, has to control his feelings and avoid attachment, while Padme has to focus on her political career and not really have time to have romantic feelings. On the surface, especially without context of what Padme says, what Anakin says sounds very out of place and randomly poetic. But when you put the context together, the scene works fine and matches the tone of the music and the scenery and where they're at in the story. We cut to Kamino, and it's a pretty cool shot of all the clones being generated in these tubes. Obi-Wan is very impressed by this, and Lama Su tells him how the clones are superior to droids, and that they can think creatively. In addition, the clones participate in combat education and training programs. He mentions that the clones have growth acceleration, their genetic structure is modified to be less independent than the original host, and take orders without any questions. Obi-Wan asks who was the original host. Lama Su responds, a bounty hunter called Jango Fett. Obi-Wan wonders where he might be, and Lama Su replies, oh, we keep him here. I want you guys to listen to this next part because it's really important in terms of why Omega from the Bad Batch can't exist.
Apart from his pay, which is considerable, Fett demanded only one thing: an unaltered clone for himself. Curious, isn't it?
Unaltered?
Pure genetic replication, no tampering with the structure to make it more docile, and no growth acceleration.
Key words here. Fett demanded only one thing: an altered clone for himself. Pure genetic replication. And that unaltered clone is Boba Fett. Jango didn't demand 2 things or 3 things, only one. So Dave Filoni completely ignored that piece of lore when making the Bad Batch. It's total Filoni nonsense. Anyway, Obi-Wan states how he would very much like to meet Jango Fett and walks over to look at the clones. This is a pretty badass shot for all the clones. Take a look.
Magnificent, aren't they?
Pretty awesome shot there with the music and everything. Pretty remarkable. And all the clones are CGI, and it holds up pretty damn well. We then cut to another remarkable shot of Naboo. I mean, George really is a master of the establishing shot. I mean, it really looks like a painting. It looks so beautiful. Padme tells Anakin about her first crush, and Anakin gets a little jealous and then asks what happened to him. Padme states that he went on to become an artist while she went into public service. Anakin says maybe he was the smart one. Padme gets a little offended and says, you really don't like politicians, do you? Anakin starts to flirt with her as he says, I like 2 or 3, but I'm not really sure about one of them. I mean, it is a corny line, but that's flirting. You use lines like that to make a lady giggle and chuckle. As you can see, she's a little charmed by it. You'd be surprised at the number of girls who like that type of flirting, because to them they see it as kind of cute and playful. Anakin talks about how he doesn't think the political system works. Padme asks, how would you have it work? Anakin replies, we need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem, agree what's in the best interest of all the people, and then do it. Padme refutes by saying, that's exactly what we do. The trouble is that people don't always agree. Anakin replies, well, then they should be made to. Padme asks, by whom? Who's gonna make them? Anakin says, I don't know, someone. Padme then asks, you? Anakin says, of course not me. Padme chimes in saying, but someone. Anakin nods his head and says, someone wise. Padme looks away and states, sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me. Anakin looks at her and says, well, if it works? Padme then looks at him, worried if he's actually being serious. But Anakin realizes this and turns it into a joke, and they have a playful banter with each other. You can see the effect Anakin has on Padme as she smiles and laughs a bit more, and he allows her to loosen up and escape from her serious political life. We see that more in this scene as Anakin rides a creature called a Shaak. S-H-A-A-K. These creatures are plump, quadrupedal, herd herbivore animals native to the grasslands of Naboo. Shaaks were often raised for their meat and had large, rotund bodies. Anakin then falls off the Shaak and lays down as if he's hurt. Padme rushes over to him to see if he's okay, but once Anakin turns around, he starts laughing and they roll over on the grass. Very much like a fairy tale love. We cut back to Kamino, and we see more of the environment. This is the shot where the digital effects really hold up to this day. Take a look. mean, like I said, there are certain shots where you can point out the flaws, but overall it still looks pretty good and very believable. And I wanted to mention another thing about Camino, and that the reason why Lucas wanted it to be a water planet is because water represents the beginning of life. And you see that with the creation of the clones. You see the interior design of Tipoca City. For the city's interior, the designers crafted a clean, ultra-modern, and antiseptic environment of shimmering white, recalling the stark color palette of George Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138. Very little of Tipoca City was actually built full scale. Jango Fett's apartment model, which we are about to see in a bit, and the landing platform were realized as sets, but most of the tour of the clone facility was realized through the use of miniatures. We see young Boba Fett. They enter inside and we learn the name of the Kaminoan, which is Tanwi. We get a good look at Jango without the armor. Now this interaction between Jango and Obi-Wan is pretty cool, as you can feel the tension between the two characters, and it's through the dialogue.
Your clones are very impressive. You must be very proud.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Ever made your way as far into the interior as Coruscant?
Once or twice.
Recently?
Possibly.
Then you must know Master Cypher Diaz.
Baba, Ruded Sohik. Master who?
Let me pause this for a second. You can tell Obi-Wan is onto him, and when he mentioned Cypher Diaz, Jango felt that.
Cypher Diaz? Is he not the Jedi who hired you for this job?
Never heard of him.
You see Boba paying attention and looking real mean as his dad tries to play it off.
Really?
I was recruited by a man called Tyrannus on one of the moons of Bogdan.
Curious.
Do you like your army?
I look forward to seeing them in action.
I mean, really good dialogue here. The tension very much building as they talk to each other. Obi-Wan leaves the room and Jango seems very worried about the situation and tells Boba to pack his things and get ready to leave. We cut to beautiful Naboo and see Padme and Anakin having a meal together. Anakin is talking about one of his Jedi adventures and talks about how they went into aggressive negotiations. Padme asks, "Aggressive negotiations? What's that?" And Anakin jokingly tells her, "Negotiations with a lightsaber," and they both chuckle. Padme picks up her utensils, but Anakin lifts the pair up towards him as a way to show off his skills to her. Some make fun of the fact that they're eating a pear, but it's like, they're missing the point. The whole point is to show Anakin impressing Padme and show a little bit of his rebelliousness towards Obi-Wan, as he mentioned that Obi-Wan would not be fond of him using the Force that way. It's completely fine. There's nothing really wrong with this scene. We see them sitting down by the fire, Padme looking smoking hot with that black dress. Anakin looks at her and pretty much lets it all out there and confesses. From what we know about Anakin so far is that he's an extremely emotional guy and is pretty overdramatic at times. So for him to spill his guts out and confess like this makes sense to his character. He talks about the pain and suffering he's gone through over the years because of how intense his love for her is. Padme doesn't know how to handle this and is overwhelmed by what he is saying. And you can see George does a great job with the lighting, as one side of her face is dark while the other is light, to show that she is struggling with this information and doesn't know whether or not to give in to her emotions. Anakin asks her if she is suffering as much as he is, and she responds, "I can't. We can't. It's just not possible." Later goes on saying, "We live in a real world. Come back to it. You're studying to become a Jedi. I'm a senator. If you follow your thoughts through to conclusion, it'll take us to a place we cannot go, regardless of the way we feel about each other." Anakin replies, "Then you do feel something." Padme says, "I will not let you give up your future for me." Anakin says, "You are asking me to be rational. That is something I know I cannot do. Believe me, I wish I could just wish away my feelings, but I can't." You start to see the light on Padme's face as she chooses not to give in. So here we see Padme being the more mature one and seeing things more level-headed, while Anakin is being the immature one and is willing to do anything for her. Anakin then walks back and gives the idea of keeping their relationship a secret, but Padme reasons with him that they'll be living a lie. Anakin concedes to what she is saying and accepts the fact that their lives would be destroyed through this lie, which is a foreshadow to what is to come in the next film. We cut to Camino and Tanwi talks with Obi-Wan and tells him to notify the council that the 1st Battalion of clone troopers are ready. Obi-Wan walks over to his ship and asks R4 to connect with the council. Obi-Wan tells Yoda and Mace Windu about what he found on Kamino. Mace Windu asks if the cloners are involved in the plot to assassinate Senator Amidala. Obi-Wan replies, "No, Master, there appears to be no motive." Yoda chimes in, telling Obi-Wan to not assume anything and to clear his mind if he is to discover the real villains behind the plot. Obi-Wan then tells them about Sifo Dyas and asks if the Council ever authorized the creation of a clone army. Mace Windu responds, "No, whoever placed that order did not have the authorization of the Jedi Council." Yoda adds, "Bring him here. Question him. We will." Obi-Wan then goes away. Yoda tells Windu, "Blind we are if creation of this clone army we could not see." Windu sighs and tells Yoda that it is time to inform the Senate that their ability to use the Force has diminished. Yoda adds that only the Dark Lord of the Sith knows of their weakness. If the Senate is informed, then their adversaries will multiply. This is the mysterious aspect of the film, to kind of keep the audience guessing as to who is really running the show and how they are able to get away with it and manipulate the Force to the point where the Jedi have become vulnerable. We cut to Anakin having a nightmare about his mother, and I believe this is the first time we ever see a dissolve transition effect in Star Wars. This shot right here, you see the clouds form a yin and yang shape. It's a great piece of filmmaking because it encapsulates the theme of duality and balance in Star Wars, and we see Anakin meditating on the balcony, trying to be balanced in his emotions and in the Force. The wide shot here really says a lot. Anakin is standing in the middle of the two pillars. One has the sun shining on it on the left, and the one on the right is covered in shadow. We are visually shown how Anakin is stuck between two paths, as he's contemplating whether or not he should go save his mother or stay on Naboo and protect Padme. Padme enters the balcony and approaches Anakin. She realizes he's meditating and turns away, but Anakin says, "Don't go." She then responds, "I don't want to disturb you." Anakin takes a deep breath and says, "Your presence is soothing." Padme tells him that he had another nightmare, but Anakin tries to deny it, saying Jedi don't have nightmares. But Padme isn't fooled as she lets him know that she heard him. Anakin decides to tell her about his dream, and after he tells her, he decides to walk towards the right pillar, the shadow pillar, visually telling us the choice he makes will lead him towards the dark side. He tells her that he's decided to go save his mother. Padme tells him that she'll go with him, so he can still follow his mandate, and she sympathizes with him, showing that she really does care about him and what he is going through. We cut to Kamino and see the Slave One ship. Obi-Wan enters the scene and Jango tells Boba to get on board, and we see Jango and Obi-Wan fight. Not much really to look into here. I'll just show the highlights of the fight for your enjoyment.
Not good.
to point out Jango bumping his head while the door closes. This was put in there intentionally just to mirror the funny moment that happens in A New Hope as one of the stormtroopers bumps his head on the door as they enter the control room. We see Padme and Anakin enter Tatooine. The ship they're flying is called the H-type Nubian yacht, which was a sleek, rocket-shaped yacht created by the Nubian Design Collective and customized by the Theed Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corporation for the Royal House of Naboo. The vessel is unarmed in accordance with the peaceful culture of Naboo. Anakin and Padme are being carried by a rickshaw droid called RIC-920, followed by R2 right behind. The RIC-920 is a utilitarian droid built for general-purpose applications. RIC-920 ended up functioning as a rickshaw droid in the busy streets of Mos Espa. The RIC-920 design was finalized by concept artist Mark Gabbana. Though designed to pull the repulsor lift rickshaw, Gabbana envisioned the droid and the conveyance as two separate entities that were paired together by necessity rather than by design. In the finished film, RIC-920 was an entirely computer-generated creation. They stop by Watto's shop, and Watto doesn't seem to recognize them at all. You see, Watto is much more of a loser now as he's dirty, unkempt, and a bit of a loner. Anakin helps Watto fix the droid and mentions that he's looking for Shmi Skywalker. Watto starts to put the pieces together and realizes that it is Anakin. Now take a look at the animation with Watto. It looks so amazing. Props to the animation team.
Lanny? You are Annie! It is you! You sure sprouted, huh? A Jedi! What do you know?
Watto tries to put Anakin to work, but Anakin quickly turns the focus on his mother. Watto responds saying that he sold her to a moisture farmer named Lars, and adds that he freed her and married her. Anakin asks, "Do you know where they are now?" Watto replies, "Ooh, a long way from here. Someplace over on the other side of Mos Eisley, I think." Anakin states in a calm but menacing tone, "I'd like to know." Watto complies and escorts them inside to go look at his records. We cut to the Slave One jumping out of hyperspace, followed by Obi-Wan's Jedi starfighter as he's able to track Jango by placing a tracker on his ship right before he left Kamino. Boba detects the ship and alerts his dad. Jango tells him that they'll move into the asteroid field and they'll have a couple of surprises for him. And this action sequence is pretty freaking awesome. Let me show you the highlights.
Seismic charges. Stand by. Blast! This is why I hate flying. R4. Prepare to jettison the spare part canisters. Fire them now.
We won't be seeing him again.
We see the Slave One enter Geonosis, and you can see all the Federation control ships on the ground. We see Obi-Wan's ship hiding on an asteroid, waiting to see if it's okay to enter the planet. He thinks he's waited long enough and enters the planet. We get a better view of Geonosis as it seems to be a very rocky planet. Obi-Wan notices the Federation ships. He finds a landing spot and gets out to explore and investigate. We cut to Tatooine where we see Anakin and Padme entering the Lars homestead. We see C-3PO. Anakin recognizes him and so does 3PO and calls him the Maker and gets all excited. Anakin tells him that he's come to see his mother. 3PO replies, I think perhaps we better go inside. Now, people tried to point out an inconsistency with 3PO not being recognized by Owen and Beru in A New Hope, and for one, 3PO is a much different color now than he is in A New Hope. Number 2, we've seen and talked about how there are many protocol droids in the galaxy. And 3, it's been 22 years, as Attack of the Clones takes place 22 years before the Battle of Yavin. For those reasons alone is why Owen and Beru don't recognize 3PO. It makes total sense. Anyway, 3PO greets Anakin and Padme to Owen and Beru, and here we see the connection between Anakin and Owen, as they are stepbrothers. Anakin asks if his mother is here, but a voice chimes in and says no, she's not. And we get introduced to Klieg Lars. Klieg tells Anakin to come inside as they have a lot to talk about. You can see the look on Anakin's face as he's concerned for his mother, and the music does a great job of setting the mood and making the audience feel the worriness that Anakin is feeling about his mother. Take a listen. Hearing that makes me feel a little anxious and eerie, and I think John Williams is playing into that, kind of telling the audience that something's not right here and we should be worried. Klieg tells the story of Anakin's mother as he says, it was just before dawn. They came out of nowhere, a hunting party of Tusken Raiders. Her mother had gone out early like she always did, to pick mushrooms that grow on the evaporators. From the tracks, she was about halfway home when they took her. Those Tuskens walk like men, but they're vicious, mindless monsters. 30 of us went out after her. 4 of us came back. I'd be out there with them, but after I lost my leg, I just couldn't ride anymore until I heal. I don't want to give up on her, but she's been gone a month. There's little hope she's lasted this long. Anakin becomes visibly distressed and gets up out of his seat, and Owen asks, "Where are you going?" And Anakin replies coldly, "To find my mother." Klieg tries to be upfront with Anakin, telling him, "Your mother's dead, son. Accept it." We see Padme being worried for Anakin. We then see Anakin looking over the twin suns at the same spot Luke does in A New Hope. The camera this time is facing inwards towards Anakin, and we can't see the suns. This represents Anakin's selfish desire to go find his mother. Padme enters the scene and we see their shadows. The way the shadows are positioned is mirrored by the way the twin suns are positioned in A New Hope. The lighter sun is on the left and the darker sun is on the right. And we see Anakin being higher than Padme, as opposed to how the twin suns are positioned, as the lighter sun is being higher than the darker sun. Also, you see the shape of Anakin's head as it looks like the helmet of Vader. This ultimately represents the darkness within Anakin beginning to rise into his deep, dark self as Vader. Anakin tells Padme to stay with the Lars family and heads off on his speeder bike. Now, take a look at this scene. It's pretty badass. You hear Duel of the Fates play in the background, telling us the fate of Anakin's mother. If she's dead, can Anakin accept it, or will he lash out and commit terrible sins? We see Anakin talking with a Jawa, and again, Lucas is playing with shadows, as we see Anakin's shadow come to surface, continuing the foreshadow of Anakin's inner darkness coming out. Before we carry on with Anakin's story, we cut back to Geonosis, where we see Obi-Wan come across a strange cave-like building, as he walks around inside and stumbles upon a droid factory. Curious about the matter, he continues on with his investigation. We begin to hear a deep masculine voice, but we don't really know who it is. He says, "We must persuade the Commerce Guild and the Corporate Alliance to sign the treaty." Then we hear another voice, this one far more recognizable as its Viceroy, Newt Gunray, asking if the senator from Naboo is dead, and adds that he won't sign the treaty until he has her head on his desk. So now we truly know who is behind the plot to assassinate Padme, as it is Newt Gunray. Another voice speaks and says, "With these new battle droids we've built for you, you have the finest army in the galaxy." Obi-Wan follows them and finds a place to hide and spies on them. The man begins to speak as they gather around the table. As I explained to you earlier, I am quite convinced that 10,000 more systems will rally to our cause with your support, gentlemen. This alien right here is Shu Mai, and she is a female Gossam native to the planet Castel, who served as the president of the Commerce Guild prior to and during the Clone Wars. She states, "What you are proposing could be construed as treason," but the other members of the Separatist Council ignore her. Wat Tambor chimes in and says, "The Techno-Union Army," and you hear a bunch of radio-like sound effects, "is at your disposal, Count." Wat Tambor is a Skakoan male from the planet Skako. He was the foreman of the Techno-Union and executive of Back Toy Armor Workshop, which is a trade federation-owned design firm that specialized in developing rugged, all-terrain ground vehicles. Then we see a Mune named San Hill, and he is the chairman of the intergalactic banking clan, and he pledges to sign the treaty. When we hear the word Count, I think it's safe to say that it's Count Dooku who they're talking to. Dooku states, "Our friends from the Trade Federation have pledged their support, and when their battle droids are combined with yours, we shall have an army greater than any in the galaxy. The Jedi will be overwhelmed. The Republic will agree to any demands we make." In my last commentary video, I hinted at who was behind the assassination and killed Padme. Now, Padme is sort of right in that she believed Dooku was behind it, but it's really Nute Gunray that wants her dead. Dooku is the one who's facilitating for it to happen, so he can earn political trust with the Viceroy. Dooku doesn't really care if she's dead. All he cares about is creating an alliance amongst different systems to fight against the Republic and create a war. We cut back to Tatooine and we see Anakin looking over the cliff to see any signs of his mother. This shot is an homage to John Ford's The Searchers. Lucas was heavily influenced by old westerns in the 50s and 60s, and this is his way of paying respects to those films. Anakin jumps down and rushes over to find his mom. Anakin is able to sense the tent she is in and uses his lightsaber to cut through. Anakin sees his mother and she looks beaten up with scars and is barely holding herself up. Anakin unties her and lays her down. His mother looks at him, wondering if it really is him. Anakin tells her, "I'm here, Mom. You're safe." His mother looks at him and tells him how handsome he is and that she's very proud of him. Anakin says, "I missed you." And what makes it heartbreaking is that she says, "Now I am complete," signifying that she realizes that her time is up. Then she tries to tell that she loves him, but it's all fragmented and isn't able to say it clearly. Anakin starts to tear up as he knows his mom is dead. Once she lets her head go, Anakin becomes stunned and is in disbelief. What happens next is Anakin going into rage. Take a look. We shift to Yoda meditating and we hear Qui-Gon's voice.
Anakin! Anakin!
Mace Windu enters the room and asks, "What is it?" Yoda replies, "Pain, suffering, death, I feel." And you hear Vader's theme play in the background. Yoda adds, "Something terrible has happened. Young Skywalker is in pain. Terrible pain." We cut to Geonosis where we see Obi-Wan trying to connect to Coruscant, but it seems to be too far to receive a signal. He then decides to contact Anakin on Naboo, but sees that he's not on Naboo. He widens the range and sees that Anakin is on Tatooine. Frustrated that he's not on Tatooine, he still decides to send a message to him. We cut to Tatooine and see R2 trying to receive Obi-Wan's message. We see Anakin return from his trip. He picks up his dead mother and you can see the sorrow and anger in his face. As he walks inside, he only directly looks at the Lars family, but not Padme. He looks at them because he's upset that they didn't look hard enough, but he doesn't lash out at them because he also understands that what happened wasn't really their fault. They're just farmers at the end of the day. In the next scene, we see Anakin fixing the shifter that broke. Padme walks in with food and blue milk as a way of being there for him for what he's going through. Anakin starts to speak and says, "Life seems so much simpler when you're fixing things. I'm good at fixing things, always was, but I couldn't. Why did she have to die? Why couldn't I save her? I know I could have." Padme tries to tell him, "Sometimes there are things no one can fix. You're not all powerful, Annie." Anakin interrupts, "Well, I should be. Someday I will be. I will be the most powerful Jedi ever. I promise you. I'll even learn to stop people from dying." Padme is a little stunned when he says this. Anakin continues, "It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back." He throws his tool across the room. What we are seeing here is that ultimately Anakin is upset about the fact that he's not powerful enough. That if he had more power, he could have kept his mother. He's greedy in that he wants more power in order to control things, in order to keep the things around that he wants, and blames Obi-Wan and the Jedi for holding him back from his potential. He begins to confess to Padme of what he did to the Tusken Raiders. I'll play the clip, since it's a pretty iconic line from this film.
"They're dead. Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
People try to clown on Hayden for sounding whiny, but that's the character of Anakin. Part of the influence of Anakin is that teenage angst, and a character in Hollywood who represents that teenage angst is none other than Jim Stark, played by James Dean, in Rebel Without a Cause.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again! You're not listening to me! You're involved in this just like I am. Now, I'm going to the police, and I want to tell them I'm involved in this tonight, and I don't want...
Did anyone see you there? Did anyone see your license plate?
What about the other boys?
I don't know!
What about the other boys? Do you think they'll go to the police?
It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter.
Well, you're the only one involved.
Well, far be it.
So the whininess is intentional, and it's been done before. And based on the plot and what's happened to Anakin, it makes sense why he acts this way. Some people just think they know movies better than George Lucas, and to them I say they're foolish to think so. Another thing I want to mention is people complaining that Padme finds him attractive in this scene. And no, she doesn't. She is trying to sympathize with what Anakin is dealing with. For what we know of the Tusken Raiders is that they shoot at pod racers to kill them for fun, and that they tortured and killed Anakin's mother. To her, they really are the animals Anakin says they are. And she can see that Anakin deeply regrets it. She understands what he did was wrong, but also understands why he did it. This doesn't make her more attractive to him. She's just simply trying to be there for him. We transition to the whole family gathered around to say their farewell to Shmi. Anakin steps forward and kneels down in front of his buried mother and picks up the sand. He says, "I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom. I wasn't strong enough. But I promise, I won't fail again." Again, we see this recurring theme of power, and that Anakin is determined to not accept the loss of loved ones, and thinks being all powerful is the key. This shot is a cool looking shot and could be made into a poster. We see R2 enter the scene and notify them that Obi-Wan has sent a message. We transition to them on the Naboo yacht and listen to Obi-Wan's message. Obi-Wan tells them that his long-range transmitter has been knocked out and tells them to retransmit the message to Coruscant. Obi-Wan states to them all what he discovered on Geonosis, but all of a sudden he gets attacked by droids. Anakin gets worried. Anakin does have a little resentment against Obi-Wan, but deep down he truly does care about him. Yoda says, "More happening on Geonosis, I feel, than has been revealed." Mace Windu tells Anakin to stay where he is and that they will deal with Dooku. He adds that the main priority is to protect the Senator at all costs. Padme tells Anakin they'll never get there in time to save him. They have to come halfway across the galaxy, and shows him that they're less than a parsec away. Anakin says, "If he's still alive," Padme replies, "Annie, are you just gonna sit here and let him die? He's your friend, your mentor." Anakin interrupts, "He's like my father." Anakin is afraid that what happened on Tatooine with his mother will happen to Obi-Wan. He doesn't want to experience that same hurt. Anyway, Anakin adds, "But you heard Master Windu. He gave me strict orders to stay here." Padme refutes, "He gave you strict orders to protect me, and I'm going to help Obi-Wan. If you plan to protect me, you'll just have to come along." And Anakin smiles after being shown this loophole. The assumption here is that Jedi in their more mature wisdom have a sense of how much danger Obi-Wan is really in, and will eventually deal with it. They don't see him in imminent danger, whereas Anakin and Padme do, so they impatiently jump off and go after him, while the others wait to get a feel of the situation of what is actually happening. That's why Yoda says there's more going on there than we know at this point, which is a way of saying you really shouldn't jump in there until you really know what's going on. We cut to the senators and Jedi gathered around Palpatine's office. Bail Organa points out that the Commerce Guilds are preparing for war. Then Palpatine adds, Count Dooku must have made a treaty with them. We see a senator that is part of the species called Gran. His name is Ask-Ak, and he represents Malastare. He tells Bail that debate is over. Now we need that clone army. Bail refutes, unfortunately the debate is not over. The Senate will never approve the use of clones before the Separatists attack. Masameda chimes in saying, this is a crisis. The Senate must vote the Chancellor emergency powers. He can then approve the creation of an army. Masameda is a Mail Chagrian, who serves as the Vice Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. Palpatine, playing the innocent Chancellor, says, "But what senator would have the courage to propose such a radical amendment?" Masameda adds, "If only Senator Amidala were here," pointing out the fact that her not being there is a real factor in this situation. And the camera shifts to Jar Jar as he's thinking the pressure is now on him to represent Naboo, as he has to make a difficult decision. And that is it for part 2 of Attack of the Clones. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. And may the Force be with you.